So after the sermon one Sunday, there was a hand on my shoulder and a long, long pause. And then someone from our church said this to me about our verse that day. I don't think that verse is an exaggeration, he says. I think that verse is something we can really, truly live. He was talking about our verse from 1 Thessalonians that we're going to be discussing in our groups today. And in your groups, you can decide if you agree. So the verse in question comes from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and it is the one right in the middle of this trio of statements, this trio of spiritual disciplines that are all described in the very same way. The verses say, "Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you." And that person I was talking to that day was talking about that part right there in the middle. Pray without ceasing. So what do you think? Is this an exaggeration? Or is it something that we can really, truly live? Let's talk about that for a moment together in our groups. So is it an exaggeration to say pray without ceasing or give thanks in all circumstances? I don't think so. Not if you're thinking about these verses as being less about specific, discrete actions and more about dispositions. In other words, it's less about did you pray every minute, and it's more about are you prayerful? Are you thankful? Are you joyful? There's a difference there, right? Actions have a start and an end. Like, for example, if somebody's leading a prayer at church, that prayer has a start, and depending on who's leading the prayer, it either quickly or eventually has an end. But dispositions are not like that. Dispositions are your way of being. They describe who you are at your core: prayerful, joyful, thankful. So how do we develop dispositions? How do we become prayerful and thankful and joyful people? Ironically, that actually brings us back to those humble, specific actions repeated over and over again. Think about what this verse is made of. It is made up of these actions. Each verse in it has a specific discipline, you might call them. Rejoice, pray, give thanks. These are all disciplines that someone practices in their life. And each discipline is then given a duration. And in every case, it's the same. Do this always. Do this without ceasing. Do this in all circumstances. And isn't that the way someone's disposition is built up? It's built up through repeating actions. It's almost like these verses are saying discipline plus duration equals disposition. These things have to become a part of your life before they can be your way of life. So let's help each other out with that for a moment together. The exciting thing about turning disciplines into dispositions is that there are many ways to do it, and it really comes down to finding the right ways that work best for you. So think about these 3 verses, and let's talk together a little bit about how we're doing with this. Like when it comes to being prayerful and joyful and thankful people, what's working well for you in terms of making these disciplines a part of your life? And maybe also, what do you find most challenging? Let's talk about these things together in our group. Well, if you would like to know where I am these days with all of this, I would say I practice prayer as a discipline. But I'm still growing into that disposition. Prayer is something that I do. But that man who clasped my shoulder after church was approaching a different place. Prayer was becoming who he was as a person, and that's how I want to be too. Sometimes I get songs stuck in my head, and when that happens, you could go all day, and sometimes that song might cross your mind. A line from that song might run across your brain a dozen times or 100 times. Sometimes it feels like it almost feels continual. It feels constant. I was wondering this week if I could have a prayer stuck in my head, like just one thought lingering on my mind with me all day. What would I want that little prayer thought to be? Like if I could really pray one thing without ceasing, what would I want that prayer to be right now, today, in my life? What would you want it to be? As we wrap up our discussion today, I'd love to have some of you answer that question. Like if you could have one little prayer with you all day long, like stuck on loop in your head, what would you want that prayer to be? And then after you've had a chance to discuss that together, you could just go directly into closing your discussion time today with a prayer. So remember this: if discipline plus duration equals disposition, then let's make sure that what we do is helping us to be who we want to be.